Detective James Holloway chases a suspect into the shadows of New York City, only to stumble into a world that should not exist. In a hidden stable, the past rises to meet him, ghostly cowboys, a father's buried secrets, and a haunting truth he cannot escape. Drawn into a circle of riders from another time, James must face the one trail he has avoided his entire life. The Cowboy's Last Ride is a powerful tale of mystery, memory, and destiny, where every man's last ride finds him in the end. The night air tasted like metal and rain. Detective James Holloway leaned against the brick wall of a narrow New York alley, listening. The suspect had vanished into the dark only seconds before. Running shoes slapped against wet pavement. Then silence. James steadied his breath. The city hummed behind him, horns, voices, the faint buzz of neon. But here, in the shadows, the world grew smaller. Every sound mattered. He smelled damp garbage mixed with hot oil drifting from a diner's back door. He heard a bottle roll across the ground, striking the gutter with a hollow ring. His hand tightened on the grip of his flashlight. He moved deeper. The alley narrowed. Water dripped steadily from a rusted fire escape above, falling in sharp rhythm against a dented trash can. James scanned the dark. A single streetlight flickered at the far end, throwing weak light across a wall of graffiti. One word stood out in bright red paint. Cowboy. He froze. That word did not belong here. It belonged to a different place, a different time. Memories pressed in. Dusty roads. A ranch outside Amarillo. His father's boots by the door, always polished, always ready for one last ride. James shook it off and pressed forward. The suspect had to be close. Then he heard it. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Something heavier. A low scrape, like leather dragging across stone. He raised his flashlight. The beam caught movement, a figure stepping out from the dark. But it was not the suspect. It was a man in a weathered hat, the brim pulled low. A long coat brushed his boots as he stood, silent, watching. The air shifted with a faint smell of tobacco smoke. James's chest tightened. This man did not belong to the city. He looked like he had stepped out of the very past James tried to bury. The stranger's eyes glinted under the streetlight. He spoke, his voice low, steady, and heavy with something James could not name. You should not have followed. The words hung in the air. Simple, heavy, unmistakably final. James kept his light steady, but his grip tightened. His pulse climbed, thudding in his ears louder than the city outside. The man stood motionless, his shadow stretching long across the alley floor. Rain beaded on the brim of his hat and ran down his coat like he had been standing there for hours. Watching. Waiting. James cleared his throat. Who are you? The man's jaw shifted, just slightly. Leather creaked as he adjusted the strap of something slung across his shoulder. It was not a rifle, though it felt like it should have been. Instead, it was a length of rope, coiled neatly, worn by use. The smell of dust struck James then, dust and sweat, an impossible scent in the middle of New York's damp streets. It was the smell of cattle yards, sunburnt earth, and barns that had not stood for decades. James's mind fought against it. He blinked, trying to push the memory back, but the man's presence only grew heavier. Every detail seemed real. Too real. You should not have followed, the man repeated. This time his tone was slower, each word drawn out as if he were testing the ground before taking a step. James steadied himself. The man I am chasing, where is he? For the first time, the stranger moved. One hand lifted, pointing deeper into the dark. But his eyes stayed on James, unblinking, unreadable. James followed the line of his hand. At the end of the alley stood a door. Steel. Old. Locked with a chain. It rattled in the wind, though no wind was there. James lowered his flashlight beam. Water pooled at the threshold. The surface quivered, disturbed by something beneath. A slow dread crawled through his chest. Every instinct screamed to stop. But his training demanded forward motion. He turned back to the stranger. The man was gone. Only the faint smell of tobacco lingered, mixing with the alley's sour air. James's mouth went dry. He whispered to himself, the way he used to before breaching doors on raids. Keep moving. He stepped closer. The chain rattled louder, though his hands had not touched it. The sound carried down the walls, echoing like distant hooves on stone. He reached out. The steel was cold, slick with moisture. When he pulled, the lock slid open without resistance. No one had touched it, yet it fell to the ground with a hollow clang. James pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like an old gate on a ranch long abandoned. Inside was silence. A silence so complete it pressed against his ears. The faint glow of his flashlight cut through dust, revealing a wide space. It was not what he expected. Not storage. Not a hideout. It was a stable. Wooden stalls lined the room, though no horses remained. Rotted hay lay in piles. The smell of manure and leather still clung to the air, as if the animals had only just left. James stepped inside. His boots crunched on straw. His heart pounded with every step, faster, harder. The stalls stretched farther than they should have, disappearing into dark. Each door bore the same word carved deep into the wood. Cowboy. James shined his light on one of the names. Beneath it, the carving continued. A date. His father's date of death. The beam shook in his hand. He blinked hard, sweat stinging his eyes. This was impossible. This was madness. And then he heard it. A sound low and familiar. The shifting weight of a saddle. The steady breath of a horse. But the stalls were empty. James turned, his light catching movement again. A shadow stepped from the far end of the stable. The same man. Hat low. Coat heavy. Eyes burning with something between sorrow and warning. James could not move. His voice broke when he spoke. "What is this place?" The man did not answer. He only lifted his hand and pointed again. This time, not at a door. Not at a lock. At James himself. James's chest tightened. The man's hand did not waver. It was not a threat, not exactly. It was something heavier. An accusation. A judgment. The silence in the stable deepened until James could hear only his own heartbeat. He raised his light higher, trying to break the spell of shadow. The beam touched the man's face. Weathered. Lined with years of hard living. Skin like leather stretched over bone. Eyes dark, yet alive with something James could not define. The smell of horses grew stronger, though none were there. It wrapped around James, pulling him back into memories he had locked away for decades. The summers on the ranch. The dust storms rolling in. The long rides beside his father, who always said there would come a last ride for every man. James had never believed it. Now the words came back, sharp as a knife. Every man has one last ride. Some choose it. Some get chosen. James swallowed hard. His voice was low, unsteady. "What do you want from me?" The man lowered his hand. For a moment, James thought he would vanish again. But instead, he stepped closer. The sound of his boots echoed in the stable, slow and measured. 1 step. 2. 3. James stood his ground, though every instinct told him to back away. His flashlight flickered. For a brief second the room plunged into darkness. When the light returned, the stalls had changed. They were no longer empty. Figures stood inside each one. Not horses. Men. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, their bodies clothed in dust-stained shirts and worn denim. Some wore badges pinned crooked on their chests. Others carried ropes looped around their shoulders. Each one stared at James as though waiting. His throat tightened. They were not alive. But they were not gone, either. He whispered the only word that came to him. "Cowboys." The man before him stopped walking. He stood only a few feet away now, the brim of his hat casting his face in deeper shadow. His voice came low, almost a growl, but steady enough to cut through the air. "You carry the same blood, the same guilt, the same burden." James felt his knees weaken. Blood, guilt, burden. The words pressed against him, each heavier than the last. Memories he had buried surged forward. His father's secret deals. The ranch foreclosed under strange circumstances. The night he had run from it all, leaving behind more than he could ever admit. And now here, in the heart of New York City, that past stood alive before him. James tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. His voice cracked into the silence. "What do you want me to do?" The man lifted his chin just slightly. Behind him, one of the pale figures stepped forward from a stall. Chains rattled. The air shifted colder. The figure raised an arm and pointed at James, the same way the stranger had. Another followed. Then another. Until every figure in the stable was pointing at him. James's heart pounded so hard it shook his chest. Sweat ran cold down his spine. His flashlight beam trembled, catching flashes of their eyes, empty, endless, filled with something deeper than hatred. He could not breathe. He could not think. He could only feel the weight of all those hands accusing him. The stranger spoke again, calm, deliberate. "You followed the wrong trail, detective. But the trail found you." James's grip faltered. The flashlight slipped, crashing to the straw at his feet. The beam spun wildly, throwing shadows across the walls. When it steadied, the stalls were empty again. Only silence. Only darkness. But the man in the hat still stood before him. Closer now. Close enough that James could smell the tobacco on his breath. Close enough to see the faint scar cutting across his jawline. And then, in a voice that carried both warning and command, the man whispered one final line. "Your last ride begins tonight." James froze. The words cut through him like steel. He could not answer. Could not move. The man's eyes stayed fixed on him. Unblinking. Unyielding. The silence stretched until James felt it pressing against his ribs. Then the sound returned, distant at first, like a memory carried on the wind. Hooves. Slow, steady, deliberate. Striking stone. Coming closer. But the ground beneath his boots was wet concrete, not dirt. There could be no horses here. Still, the sound grew louder. Each strike echoed in his bones. James's breath quickened. He forced himself to speak, though his voice shook. "I do not understand. Why me?" The man tipped his hat back just enough for his face to break the shadow. His expression was carved in stone. No kindness. No cruelty. Only certainty. "Because you ran. And now the trail has caught you." James's mouth went dry. The memory hit before he could stop it. The night his father was taken away. James, a boy then, standing in the barn doorway, watching men with ropes and iron badges drag his father into the dark. His father had shouted one thing, just one, before disappearing. "Ride, James. Ride and do not look back." And James had obeyed. He had run. He had not looked back. Until now. The hooves grew louder. The stable floor seemed to tremble with their weight. James backed away, bumping against one of the stall doors. The wood groaned. Splinters scraped his palm. He shined his light down the row. The stalls were filling again. Not all at once, just one by one. Figures taking shape in the dark. Not the pale cowboys he had seen before. Different now. Men in modern clothes. Leather jackets. Torn jeans. Some carried knives. Others clutched pistols. Every face locked on him. The suspect he had chased into the alley stood among them. His eyes wide, lips pulled tight, as if he too was trapped in something he did not understand. James whispered, almost to himself, "This is not real." But the man in the hat stepped closer, closing the space between them. His boots pressed into the straw. The air thickened with smoke and dust. "It is as real as the choices you made," he said. "You turned your back. Now every trail you left behind has led here." James's chest burned with panic. The stable felt too small, the air too thin. He wanted to run, but his legs were heavy, rooted to the ground. The suspect moved then. He broke from the line of figures and stumbled forward, hands raised. "Detective, please, you have to help me. They will not let me leave." His voice cracked, desperate, human. But before James could answer, one of the cowboys stepped from the stall. He caught the suspect by the collar and dragged him back into the dark. The man screamed, clawing at the ground. His voice echoed through the stable, bouncing off every wall. Then it cut short. Only silence remained. James's hands trembled. His heart slammed against his ribs like a caged animal. He forced words through his throat. "Why show me this? Why now?" The man in the hat lowered his gaze. For the first time, James thought he saw something behind the stone face. Not anger, not even judgment, but sorrow. "Because every trail ends," the man said softly, "and yours ends where his began." James felt the world tilt. The walls seemed to bend inward. The ground shifted beneath him. For a moment, he thought he might fall straight through. He looked at the man, his voice barely a whisper. "My father." The man did not answer. He only turned, walking toward the far end of the stable where the shadows thickened. As he moved, the sound of hooves followed, steady and unbroken. James wanted to call out, to demand answers, but his throat locked. He could only follow, step by step, deeper into the dark. The smell of tobacco and dust guided him forward. The sound of hooves kept his pace. And the words echoed in his mind, impossible to silence. "Your last ride begins tonight." James followed. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air thickened, filled with the scent of dust and leather, a scent that did not belong in New York but belonged to his blood. The beam of his flashlight shook in his hand. It caught glimpses of the walls, planks of wood, scarred by years of use, nailed together with iron spikes blackened by rust. Every stall he passed seemed older, more decayed, as though he was walking backward through time itself. He could hear it now. The hooves. Not just one horse. Dozens. The sound layered, overlapping, rising in rhythm until it rolled like thunder through the hollow of the stable. And still he saw nothing. No horses. No riders. Only the man in the hat, leading him deeper. James's chest ached with every breath. His heart raced, and yet he could not turn back. Something stronger than fear pulled him forward, an invisible rope looped tight around his ribs. The floor changed beneath his boots. Concrete gave way to hard-packed dirt. The city was gone. He was standing on soil. He could smell the sharp bite of dry grass and old manure. He stopped. He turned. Behind him, the door was gone. No alley. No steel chain. Only a long stretch of corral fence disappearing into night. His breath caught. He whispered to himself, "This is not possible." The man ahead of him did not stop walking. His boots sank into the earth with each step. The brim of his hat cut his face in half, shadow hiding every expression. James forced his legs forward. The darkness opened into a wide yard. A wind swept across the land, carrying the sharp smell of sagebrush and the distant cry of a coyote. The stable doors behind him slammed shut. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the night. James spun, shining his light, but the doors were already swallowed by shadow. He was outside now. Not in New York. Not anywhere he knew. The man in the hat stopped at the edge of the yard. He turned slowly, eyes meeting James's. And for the first time, James saw them clearly. They were his father's eyes. A shiver ran through him so hard his knees nearly buckled. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. When he finally forced words out, they came in a broken whisper. "Dad." The man's face did not change. He did not smile. He did not soften. He only stared, silent, as though waiting for James to understand something unspoken. And then, beyond them both, the sound grew louder. The thunder of hooves. Rising. Pounding. Coming closer. James turned his head, the beam of his flashlight cutting across the open field. At first he saw only darkness. Then shapes. Riders. A long line of them, charging hard across the land. Dust rose behind them like a storm cloud, though the ground was damp with night. Their silhouettes grew clearer, hats, ropes, rifles. Faces hidden in shadow. James's heart seized. He knew this was no chase. They were not hunting someone else. They were coming for him. The man, his father or whatever he was, spoke at last. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but filled with a finality James could not ignore. "You cannot outrun them any more." The riders closed in. James felt the ground shake beneath his boots. The smell of sweat and dust filled his lungs. Every muscle in his body screamed to run, but his legs would not move. The line of riders spread wide, encircling him, the thunder of hooves so loud it drowned his breath, his heartbeat, even his thoughts. He raised his light, but the beam faltered, weak against the storm. The circle tightened. Figures loomed above him, faceless, silent, relentless. James dropped his flashlight. The beam spun, catching one rider's chest. A badge gleamed there, pinned crooked on his shirt. A sheriff's star. Rusty. Bent. But still shining. James's breath hitched. That badge. He knew it. He had seen it once, on the night his father was taken away. His vision blurred. The world tilted. He felt the weight of every trail, every secret, every choice he had buried. And then the circle stopped. The riders sat their horses in silence, surrounding him, eyes hidden beneath wide brims. The storm of hooves stilled, replaced by the sound of heavy breathing, both horses and men. The man in the hat, his father, stepped into the circle. He looked at James one last time. "This is where your last ride begins." The circle of riders closed tighter. Their silence weighed heavier than their presence. Each one watched James as if judging, as if measuring whether he was ready. James's chest heaved. He looked to his father, this man, this shadow, this ghost of blood and memory. For years he had carried the weight of running. For years he had buried the truth beneath city streets and broken cases. But now there was nowhere left to run. The old cowboy met his eyes. For the first time, his face softened. Not a smile. Not forgiveness. But something like understanding. A horse stepped forward from the circle. Tall. Dark. Its saddle worn, its reins heavy with dust. The animal lowered its head, breath steaming in the cool night air. James's hand trembled as he reached for the reins. The leather was warm. Real. Alive. He swung his leg over and settled into the saddle. It felt both foreign and familiar, like stepping into a memory too sharp to hold. The riders shifted, their horses stamping in rhythm, waiting. The man, his father, mounted beside him. He spoke only once more. "Every man has a last ride, son. Tonight you take yours." The circle broke. The riders turned toward the horizon where the land stretched endless and dark. Their hooves struck the earth like drums. One by one, they rode forward. James followed. The weight in his chest eased as the wind caught his face, carrying away the fear, the guilt, the years of silence. For the first time, he did not run from the past. He rode with it. The line of riders disappeared into the night, their silhouettes swallowed by the vast unknown. Only the echo of hooves remained. And then, nothing but silence. James Holloway was gone. The city was far behind. The cowboy's last ride had begun.